Hey, good friends, welcome back. Now, hour number 2 is just setting sail as we speak. And as promised, Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley on the line with us. Tarpley.net is where you go to get all of his great writings and his interviews and so forth. And, of course, he's got a program on World Crisis Radio every Saturday. It airs. Dr. Tarpley, thank you so much for joining us again tonight on INN.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, listen, Webster, the financial markets are roiling and so forth, and, everyone is talking about the other shoe dropping now. It looks like pre-World War I. What's up? How do you, from your vantage point, the whole financial situation, what could be going on there?
Well, let's try to go through it step by step, huh? The first thing that everybody notices is that we're somehow back into a time of grave instability in the stock market. At least that's the first symptom that we see, right? They've had wild swings beginning to happen. I think out of the last 18 sessions of the New York stock market, 12 of them have led to triple-digit changes, ups, downs, moves in one direction or the other. And out of the past 6 days, I think they've had 4 of them being down. Anyway, don't quote me on that one, but it's the so-called volatility is back. And I would try to speculate maybe on why this is happening, but even more so since I deal in answers and programs and policies. After the speculation, you always have to get down to what to do, and then it's important there to see that the various competing strategies are all discredited. In other words, the ones that purport to deal with how do you actually overcome such a financial crisis. You've got the neoliberal or monetarist one, that is to say, the austerity that's destroying Europe. That's clear enough. Deflation in Europe, and we should talk about deflation because this, especially for libertarians, this is going to be a very ugly surprise. Then we have the Keynesian approach, right? The Krugman approach. This is also totally inadequate. There may be some others, but then there's the one that I try to represent, which is the American system. And Tom, I'm a candidate for the head of the Federal Reserve. You might have seen my. There's a page on Twitter, Tarpley for Fed Head. This started when Bernanke was quitting and Yellen was coming in, and quite a few people, friends of mine and others, have put forward Tarpley for Fed Head as a hashtag on Twitter in particular. And I think that there may be some interest in the coming weeks and months in changing course, because of course what Yellen has done is, I guess, to most points of view, simply a kind of a automatic pilot of Bernanke. But let's look, why would this be happening now, right? Here we are in October. So let's think about it, right? One thing is, of course, that October is the cruelest month on the stock market, right? And of course, the stock market is understood here simply as it's a symptom of things that are going on at much deeper levels, right? The stock market I would not regard as a cause, but it's a place where things explode into the public view, and then they do become, efficient causes of other things. But it's October. Remember, there was the crash of 1987 in October. There was a mini crash in 1989, and that was in October. And then we had the infamous crash in 2008, which began in the springtime with Bear Stearns, and it actually seemed to reach a peak in the end of September and then during October.
Right at the Democratic Convention of 2008.
Yes, right. So, October, very bad month. And that's the reason for that is that there are payment deadlines that have to do with the moment when the third quarter turns into the fourth quarter. So at the end of September and beginning of October, certain payments have to be made. If they're not made, that's a moment when bankruptcies of large institutions seem to become evident behind the scenes, right? The public doesn't see it, but people try to get away from it. And then there's also the fact that earnings have to be reported, right? For the next couple of weeks, we're going to have earnings, and sometimes those are very bad, and they can actually pitch the whole thing into a panic mode. The other thing, there are a couple of other things, but the other thing that's notable about this October is we've had this quantitative easing 3, right? QE3, quantitative easing 3. People may have lost touch with this, but it was there was quantitative easing 1 and 2. These are all support operations for bankrupt derivatives. It's actually amazing. The Federal Reserve, in its role as a central bank, which in my view is already, it's a perversion of what such a bank should be. What we would need is a national bank that serves the entire economy and all the people. But the Federal Reserve doesn't do that. It serves banks only. And what they've done is decide that the most useful thing the Federal Reserve could do, right, after they had dealt with the immediate panic of 08, 09, we've even got a trial going on about that, right? Geithner and his counterparts in the previous administration, right? The two secretaries of the Treasury and some others are taking part in a judicial proceeding here in Washington, right? Hank Paulson from the Bush years and Geithner from the Obama years. And that was, of course, a credit stimulus. But what they've done since then is QE1, QE2, QE3. And these are buying up toxic derivatives. In other words, bankrupt, kited derivatives, assets that have no value, that actually have negative value, right? You should be paying a garbage company to come and take them away. These are the kinds of things, if you found them on your computer, you'd try to push the delete button or you'd throw them into the shredder. But the Federal Reserve has added several $trillion, right? $3 trillion, $4 trillion of toxic, kited, bankrupt derivatives, usually collateralized debt obligations and some other things that they've been buying up. So they've been actually supporting the prices of these derivatives. So it means the banks have been able to unload quite a part of the derivatives that they had. But my guess is that the derivatives holdings of these zombie banks remain very, very high because they've been entering into new ones. They've essentially been opening up new over-the-counter derivatives contracts as time goes on. So the trick about all this, though, is that this month of October is the month when the quantitative easing ends. After about the middle of the month, there will be no more, in theory, no more quantitative easing of any kind. In other words, no more support operations for derivatives under QE1, QE2, QE3, and there is no QE4. And you'd think at that point, that's when you would really see what the health, to some extent, of the underlying banking system is. And my estimate is that the underlying banking system is rotten, bankrupt, and chock full. It's choked with these derivatives. And probably the only thing you could do to get rid of those derivatives in any useful way is to outlaw them. Specifically, the collateralized debt obligation should be outlawed. This was something that even Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs was willing to talk about when he got on television after his Senate hearings of a couple of years ago. You may remember that, when he was grilled and quotes were read back to him of what various Goldman Sachs employees were writing about various derivatives, CDOs usually, collateralized debt obligations that he was selling. And he said at the end of the day, well, maybe collateralized debt obligations have to be banned, outlawed. They should be. They should have been long ago. And then you have credit default swaps, right? This is the thing that AIG was dealing with. The credit default swap is either gambling, where gambling is not legal and therefore it's illegal, or it's providing insurance, but you have not met the legal requirements to be an insurance company. You don't have reinsurance. You don't have reserves, and you have no insurable interest in anything. You're doing this from afar, right? These are arm's length things. It's not like you own something and you're trying to hedge against a change in value. So those two are the most dangerous kinds of derivatives, the CDO and the CDS. So right now, those are hanging without that updraft. And it's amazing if the Federal Reserve had been spending all that money. It's almost $1 trillion per year, right? It's about $80 billion a month over the last several years. So $1 trillion a year, and that is now choking the Federal Reserve balance sheet. If I had been at the head of the Federal Reserve, I could have used those trillions. $1 trillion a year would get you, I think, a general recovery in the U.S. Maybe not the fullest, maybe not the best, but it would get you a recovery, right? $1 trillion a year, provided that you channeled all that money into infrastructure of every type. That means superhighways, modern railroads, modern energy grids, modern energy production, canals, ports, locks, and then
jobs.
This is the jobs, but you're not getting jobs as make work. You're getting jobs on these construction contracts.
The population of the United States is getting something for its nothing that it's putting up. It's getting infrastructure that it can enjoy and use and make their lives easier.
30 million new productive jobs is your target. Now, $1 trillion a year is not as much as I would want. I would want $5 trillion right off the bat to get a real shock effect. In other words, shock and awe when people see millions of jobs created every month. That would then, right now they're congratulating themselves because they got an anemic 250,000 jobs. Right? We could do 10 times that in the first month.
We could do that in New York City alone.
Things really have changed.
I don't want to take you off track. It's a quick question, however. Doesn't this bailing out of the casino violate the first law of capitalism, which is, hey, you want to do risky business. Hey, you win, you lose. And that's what's supposed to keep the system healthy. So it not only is it wasted money, like you said, not only is it money that could have gone to something that really could have helped lift us up, but it was in violation of the first law of capitalism. It's propping up crooked, corrupt business.
That's fine, except there are no laws of capitalism. Right? Capitalism has always been steal as much as you can. In other words, loot in the form of a predator, right? Asset strip and all these things.
Well, that's true. Listen, the music's happening. Hold on.
A historical example would be...
We have no time. We have to go off the air, Webster. Okay. We'll be right back with Webster Tarpley just after this.
Okay.
All right, good friends. Think about what you're doing to me here. We've got Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley on the line. Tarpley.net is where you go to get his writings, his interviews. Indeed, even the interviews that he does here on this show can be found there as well. Dr. Tarpley, right before the break, we were talking about this quantitative easing and so forth. It's going to be all over, propping up these bad deals and so forth. That doesn't sound like capitalism to me, but historically, hasn't this been tried before? Haven't capitalists tried to get guarantees whether they do lousy business or not?
Yeah, I guess you could say industrial capitalism is one thing, and it would be viable, and it would allow these weaker companies to be eased out, but in a generally positive way. Industrial capitalism, however, is not what we have. We have finance capital, and finance capital is always obsessed with rent seeking, no matter what they say. Right? You look at somebody like Ron Paul. Oh, I'm against big government. And then he turned out to be the earmark champion of the House of Representatives in 2008, 2009. So they are rent seekers. They pretend not to be. And the interesting parallel is that in the Third French Republic, right, around 1880, 1885, there were committees of holders of French government bonds and holders of stocks in government-sponsored companies like railroads and things like that, who demanded a formal guarantee from the French government in advance that they would not lose money, that they would be guaranteed a gain. So that's capitalism is whatever they can make it. And, of course, the gullibility of the average person is their greatest asset. But let's just go back. Why, again, minus 335 today. A lot of experts saying, this is the ugliest we've seen it in who knows how many years. It's quite possible that the combination of the end of the quantitative easing, the normal stresses and strains that you'd see in any October, and of course any October in a depression, since we are in a world financial depression, the end of quantitative easing, the October problem is adding up to create some kind of financial panic. Plus, then we've got this other thing with Argentina, right? That Argentina, back in 2000 and 2001, had declared a debt moratorium, which I think was exactly the right thing for them to do. They went through the ringer for a while, but they were able to reduce their foreign financial debt by something between 1/2 and 1/3. This is under guy who should live as a hero in the annals of this kind of stuff, right? Anti-imperialist president of Argentina, Rodriguez Saa, S-A-A, and this has been managed then by other presidents. So what you had was by the time we got a couple of years ago, the Argentine bonds were selling for pennies on the dollar, and then various vulture funds or locust funds or hedge fund hyenas, as I call them, came in and bought up these vulture funds, bought up the devalued debt of Argentina, and then turned around and said, we paid 5 cents on the dollar, but we demand 100 cents in terms of debt service and finally the principal. So with that, they were able to convince this federal judge in Manhattan, Grisa, that he should interfere with a scheme for refinancing, for a haircut, right, for a write-down of the Argentine loans, which had been accepted by the vast majority of these creditors, but which a couple of these vulture funds in New York City decided they wanted to fight, right? They were willing to invest money in lawyers in order to get this money paid out to them. And Grisa was therefore able to issue a court order which prevented any U.S. or U.S.-linked financial entity from taking part in Argentina's attempt to pay the vast majority of what was still owed for the previous month, right, 3 months ago. So now we're headed into the same quandary, right, that the Argentines want to pay. Most of their creditors are happy to take the payment, but a couple of extreme monetarist predators in Manhattan in particular are able to pull the string on this corrupt judge and then get what they want. So this, by the way, this is the kind of behavior which is killing the dollar as a reserve currency. In other words, you can't run the principal judicial forum for an issue like the debt of a big, important country like Argentina. You can't treat that as like dirty ward politics, right? That some hedge fund can come in and buy the judge, which seems to be what is
backroom smoke-filled politics
on
the local level.
You've got to have at least the illusion of equanimity, right? Of an even-handed approach that the Argentine side gets heard and gets some attention given to what the Argentine interests are. So anyway, that's another one. And what you found is that the representatives of the U.S. Department of Justice they seemed to be more interested in driving Argentina into formal bankruptcy than they were in actually getting some money paid to some people who wanted to get the money that they could still get. So the idea is that, but by the behavior of the U.S. government, both the Justice Department and this judge seem to get there from outside, right? Because they say it's an independent judiciary. Of course, we're not so sure. What they're doing is saying we are going to give up on the attempt to have an even-handed court in the world financial system, which is still centered on the dollar. We're actually going to try to drive this thing into a bankruptcy, thereby courting world panic. So they're willing to play brinksmanship and skirt the edge of panic and then maybe fall in.
Well,
so
they don't want to set a precedent, do they? They don't want other people to say, okay, Argentina did it, we can do it too.
I suppose so, but this is a very, very big case, for a president. If you want to do that with some banana republic. This Argentina is after all a rather big deal. Now, here's the other thing. Oil is falling in price. This is actually very interesting, right? The falling price of oil and what this may mean. Oil is now at $85 a barrel, right? And you will have noticed, the last time I got gas, it was something like $3.30, right? Which is 50 or 60 cents below where it was at the beginning of the summer. What does this show us? The first thing that I'd like to point out for people who were very opinionated and very wrong is there is no peak oil, gang. Peak oil was bunk, was a fraud. The people who pushed it were frauds. There's one poor guy that has now sent himself to his eternal reward. I won't go into him, but he was telling us all about peak oil and the 9/11 Truth Movement.
Former guest on the show, and I know exactly who you're talking about. And you're right. I think he was on the very wrong side.
Wrong. I mean, and his, he was telling us about Colin Campbell. I think his name was in London, was a great expert in peak oil. And then he had some guy, some descendant of Darwin. I think his name was Galton, who has a good Malthusian and Darwinist, is telling us that oil was limited and so forth. This was a complete fraud. So if you're one of the dupes and patsies out there in Radio Land who believed that garbage, that there was peak oil, you got to, with a contrite heart, search your conscience, right? You got to turn away from that stuff.
Webster, I get email from people on this all the time. It's a coming. It's a coming. They just miscalculate. It's a coming. It's a coming.
And that's what has kept, as I recall, this guy Colin Campbell had tried that every 20 years, and he tried it 2 or 3 times already by the time this poor guy, this poor suicide reached him. In other words, and I can tell you the model of all of this is about 1866. We have the British economist, I believe it was Jevons, right? Another one of these quackademic British economic charlatans, right? From the Ricardo Mill school. Jevons said that the world was approaching peak coal. That was his pessimistic recipe for the 1860s and the 1870s. And of course, that was also bunk. Coal production was shut down in Great Britain, but that was done by Thatcher in the 1980s, and there was no objective lack of coal at all. So there is no peak oil. But now the question
wait a minute. Before you go on, we're coming on the break. We'll be right back with Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley talking about economics. And all right, good friends, welcome back. Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley in the house, and he's going to be here with us for another 2 more segments. Tarpley.net. And I'm telling you right now, you can go there. You can have a really good time because the information is really, really nice. Whether it be an interview with Dr. Tarpley or one of his really good articles, go there and look up his articles on the Ukraine. You want some history about the Ukraine and how it came into being? Very, very good pieces there. The United States and Russia, the historic alliances that the British have always tried to destroy, that's there too. Webster, before the break, we were talking about this crazy, the entrails of the economic system right now, trying to pick through them and make sense of it. The price of oil is going down. If peak oil was a reality, what?
The first thing to look at is what's happening to your level of overall economic activity, and that try to do that worldwide. Right now, Europe remains extremely depressed, I would say. Right, and with Europe, I don't want to get the libertarians out there too excited, but Europe is now either in deflation or very close to deflation, and this is precisely what the libertarians say can never happen, but it's what they want. Remember, if there's deflation, it means that money becomes more and more valuable, and the things that you pay for become cheaper and cheaper, right? So the idea is libertarians, since they have money, and libertarians believe that they will have money, and if you're a libertarian and you don't have any money, I'm afraid you better get your head examined because you've been talking up somebody else's book, right? The whole point of being a libertarian is that you want a total all-out deflationary crash so that your stash of money will be worth more and you can buy up everybody and everything in the world. So in Europe right now, we have negative interest rates at the European Central Bank. And this is this character, Draghi, D-R-A-G-H-I. It's Draghi, a hard G. And this is the guy who says he's going to do whatever it takes to save the European economies. What he means is the European banking system, right? That's how he sees it.
Right. Doesn't he mean, Webster, I hate to interrupt, doesn't he mean anything it takes to save this financial oligarchy union that they've created to keep everybody in line?
The union is fine. The union has roots that are deeper and more profound than the monetarism. Now, you got to remember, the European community comes out of the post-war situation. It has strong social democratic elements in it. It has strong Catholic social elements in it, right? So it's a very, very, and I can't go through all the reasons why this is objectively a good thing. But what's bad about it, just like our own country, is that monetarists and neoliberals have taken over. So that's the whole point. Don't blame the European structure for the fact that you've got a bunch of bankers' boys running the show, which is demonstrably what you do have. So Draghi. Now, Draghi is he's actually forcing people to pay money to keep funds stashed in the European Central Bank, right? It's 1/5 of 1% negative interest. So you put your money in there, and when then you want it back, it's less. So he's trying to get people to invest. But of course, as a monetarist, he can't imagine how to do this, right? So right now with the European Central Bank, the interest rate is, I think it's 1/4 of 1% is what you have to pay to borrow money. But if you want to put money
the bank
into
rate, that's not individuals, right?
Yeah, this is all interbank, because remember, the problem with central banks is they only serve banks. This will have to change. We have to have a national bank on the Alexander Hamilton model, which says we are going to be here to provide the credit as a public utility to advance infrastructure, agriculture, industry, standard of living, full employment, longevity. All of these other things have to be served by the monetary and credit and fiscal policies. But so Draghi is supposedly grappling with the beginnings of deflation. And boy, you don't want to be around if deflation comes, right? If deflation comes from Europe to the U.S., if you have personal debts, those are going to crush you because they're going to be more and more and more difficult to pay back if we go into deflation. Again, don't tell the libertarians because they can't imagine this, right? The libertarian always says, oh, the big danger is hyperinflation. Government prints money and that leads to hyperinflation. Well, that's not what you see in Europe at all, and not even in the United States. So
we haven't had inflation worries since when? Since the 80s, no?
Yeah, there is somewhat more inflation than is officially admitted, but there has been no hyperinflationary exposure, right? And some people have been calling for that, every year for the past 20 years. So you'd have to say the United States remains in stagnation. And if the Republicans, which I want to avoid, if the Republicans take over the Senate, they will then impose more austerity. We have the famous tape where Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, makes a sweetheart promise to David Koch, the reactionary predator, right? The Koch brothers, Koch brothers. Okay. Mitch to Koch, he promises there'll be no increase in the minimum wage. There'll be no relief for student loan victims, right? 1.3 trillion of high interest debt. They're not going to do anything about that. They love the free market in this sense, right? Free market for the others and rent seeking for themselves. And then he also says we can do anything we want. If we have 51 votes in the Senate and if we have the House, we can basically do anything we want with riders and with budget reconciliation year by year. In other words, anything they can force Obama to sign can be put into law. And I think the idea that Obama would fight back is a not very realistic thing. So I would say to people,
Webster, as a momentary aside, you bring up student debt. Did you see recently where Germany is now, declared the whole country free college education for their people?
Yeah, free, but it doesn't. You still got your living expenses, your books, and all this other stuff, and that's not so different from what France has had. I think France has had something similar for quite a while. So it sounds fine. Anyway, that's them. What we would obviously need is there should be a way to get a free BA, BS by going to community college and then going to a municipal or state institution, right? Mm-hmm. State college. You should be able to get through for free, and in terms of tuition and fees. But then you've got books and you've got your living expenses. On that, well, the Federal Reserve should open up a student loan window where they refinance the $1.3 trillion goes down to 0%, and the future borrowings of people who need some loans to stay in school, that should go to 0% too. What the hell are we talking about here? This bank has to serve the public interest. It should not serve only banks. And this shows you why the crackpot libertarian demand that the Fed be abolished is absolute bananas. You want that credit creating power because that allows you to do things like refinance the entire existing student debt down to 0% and probably a 20 to 30 year maturity at that. That would allow people to restart their lives. The libertarians squawk because the libertarians are some of the people who have lent this money. And they say, what? If you do that, I'll lose my 6, 7, 8, 10, 12% student loan business, right? Yeah, that's exactly right, because that is strangling the entire future of the United States. But now back to
well, before you say that, so don't get rid of the Fed, deprivatize the Fed, right?
That's right. Deprivatize it. Again, if you want to be a little bit more radical, you can nationalize it, you can seize it, you can federalize it. That's sort of neutral, or you can deprivatize it. It's all the same thing. And you can do that either all at once, or you do it on the installment plan where you open a student loan window, 0%, 30-year maturities, refinance. You can open your infrastructure window. $5 trillion right away would be optimum. And again, that money is not borrowed from China. It does not come from taxes. It's separate from the Treasury. It's simply that the credit creating power of the United States, in spite of everything, is still considerable. It is substantial. It is formidable. And you can put that to work doing the things we need to do. You want to defend against Ebola? You better build 1,000 hospitals. You better increase the number of hospital beds per 1,000 people in the United States by 50% over the next couple of years. You better start training 250,000 doctors, and you're not going to do it if you propose to crush them with
all debt. Right, we're going to have to take a quick break. And on topic, the song European Superstate from Killing Joke, all about it. We were just talking about that.
It's super. Okay, Superstate.
European. All right, good friends. Let's get right back to it. Dr. Webster, Griffin Tarpley on the show tonight. Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. It's a great site. I love, Webster, how you got that picture of the Academy of Plato there on your website.
Well, that's the goal that we're aiming at, and whether we get anywhere near it or not, I leave to the judgment of history. But let me just mention now, sure. This oil situation, right? Oil is going down. Why is this? There is no peak oil, that we know. That's a fraud. So what we had today, we had this Boone Pickens, right? Supposedly somebody who knows something, right? Coming from that Texas, Oklahoma, the Permian Basin. It's also the origin of the Bush family in terms of their money. But Pickens' line is that Saudi Arabia is deliberately increasing production because they want to wipe out some of the shale boys. In other words, the entrepreneurs of the
new kids on the block.
Well, but shale is high cost, right? Shale is a dead end. It's backward. It's expensive. It can only exist
It's polluting, it's dangerous, and it causes earthquakes. I mean, what else do you want? Yeah.
Not good. This is backward, right? You want modern science, you get yourself a fourth-generation high-temperature pebble bed nuclear reactor for today, right? Replace those 104 relics that we have. And above all, set your sights on fusion energy, right? The ITER coming from the the south of France. But look, in terms of the oil, right? The big thing to see about oil is if oil demand goes down, it may mean that the world economy is once again in a violent contraction. We had a violent contraction before in 2008, 2009. For many countries, this has never ended, right? Italy has been in a permanent depression for about 10 years or more. The United States is still stagnating, right? The labor force dynamics look bad. Europe on the whole looks bad. Japan, I think, still stagnant. U.S. stagnant. So that's a depression. So the big one was Germany, right? Now we're told that Germany's export figures have shown the worst drop since 2009. The most recent German export statistics. Now, that could be the contraction because German production props up a whole lot of this entire speculative house of cards. So if we put together demand contracting because of economic activity contracting, some attempt by the Saudis to fiddle around in this, and I would also then add the CIA and the U.S. oil companies seeking to pull the rug out from under Putin by saying essentially, we're going to cut into your main source of revenue and income for the Russian government. You can in some ways put a low oil price for the moment together with the sanctions, right? Because these sanctions have also had some effect, right? There have been U.S. and Europe
had an effect on Europe too, though, right? Even England, they're hurting Europeans.
It's self-defeating, and the only reason these came about because the U.S. and to some degree the British blackmailed, arm-twisted, bludgeoned, threatened the Continentals to do it. And the Continentals that really didn't want it were Italy and Germany, number one, and France then after them. So, but you put this all together, and remember that we're still in a depression, right? We're still, in the throes of this worldwide depressed economy. We're now 6 or 7 years.
But Webster, wasn't this the raison d'etre for the Federal Reserve in the first place? We'll keep you out of these things. We're the bankers. You shouldn't. You're the politicians. They full speed ahead right into one in 29.
That was always the promise, never the reality. Now let's look at it. The libertarians are useless, and the Keynesians are not quite as bad, but they're also incapable of bringing about a recovery. And when I say a recovery, let's think about full employment, right? To get from the current U.S. labor market to full employment, you would need approximately 30 million new productive jobs. And I do not mean coolie wages. I do not mean the kind of jobs that Rick Perry in Texas they've created all these jobs. Those are minimum wage or sub-minimum wage jobs that they create with no benefits. I'm talking real jobs, union wages, decent working conditions, and a decent benefits package. So 30 million new productive jobs is in some ways one of the most effective social programs. This would make everybody valuable. It would give people bargaining power with employers. It would put a stop to all kinds of abuses in the workplace. It would promote the formation of unions. It would force employers to bid to keep the loyalty of employees. They'd have to offer benefits. And it would, above all, get us away from the low-wage economy. The low-wage economy for the United States is suicide. We'll never be able to underbid Vietnam or Thailand or Burma or whatever the next place is in this never-ending sequence. The only way you can do it in the United States is to take the German model and improve on that. In other words,
and it's not for nothing, right? This is in exchange for real, tangible infrastructure assets that we can all benefit from, right?
That will actually change your life. I mean, perhaps a banal example, the Washington subway just added 5 new stations on the way to Dulles Airport. So we've long had, the red line, the blue line, the orange line, the green line. Now we have the silver line, and that's going to go to Dulles Airport, right? Only 50 years or 60 years late will they reach the principal airport. But even the fact that they have these extra 5 stations has made a difference for me, for example. I've been on that line now several times, and it's much easier to do that than to take a car or whatever it is. But now look, here it is in a nutshell. Fiscal stimulus is the Keynesian. This is one of the things the Keynesians like. Fiscal stimulus, you run a big government deficit. And there's nothing really wrong with that, except that today the public opinion is so hysterical, right, because of the Tea Party and other reactionaries, that it would be hard to get a big fiscal stimulus going. And the other problem is, you got to remember, it's never enough to simply promote consumer goods production and consumption. The goal of a recovery occurs when you relaunch your capital goods industries, right, where you make generators and locomotives.
Tennessee Valley Authority, right?
Stuff like that, right? Huge generators, huge projects, cement, steel. The problem with our stimulus here under Pelosi back in 2009 was that this was only consumer. There was a small amount, relatively small amount, maybe even large, but 80 to 100 billion in terms of highway and similar stuff. But that needed to be much bigger. And again, that was 700 billion. I'm calling for 5 trillion right off the bat from the deprivatized Fed. Then there's monetary stimulus, right? That's where you print lots of money and you flood the system with that. Well, that's QE3, right? You buy up a lot of toxic derivatives and you spew money out into it. That's helicopter Ben Bernanke, right? The helicopter he's throwing money out of a helicopter. That's monetary stimulus. And
what about the inflationary fear from that sort of thing? Have we seen it? We have not seen
the what fear?
The fear of inflation from making all that money to cover these debts.
Generally speaking, this whole thing with inflation is simply a boogeyman. It doesn't exist. What you're seeing now is the beginning of deflation in Europe. And this is really, really ugly, as I tried to point out. Now, here's the other thing, though. You want to get out of this. We've said fiscal stimulus is a very difficult path right now. Monetary, that's QE3. That has been tried, I think, on a fairly robust scale. It's failed. Here's what's left is credit stimulus. Now, you may say credit stimulus has already been used. Yeah, credit stimulus was used to save AIG, right? This is Maiden Lane, created by the New York Federal Reserve Bank. But the kind of credit stimulus that I'm talking about is the other kind. It's the pro-production kind. And the credit stimulus would include a Fed window, let's say $2 trillion available for refinancing student loans down to zero, and also future
down to 0% interest.
0% for 20 or 30-year maturities. We talked. A friend of mine is running for Congress, James Hinton, in the 5th Congressional District of California, right, the Napa Sonoma area. They've just had an earthquake. Well, you've got to have as much emergency credit as is needed, 0% for 100 years. If you're a government agency with busted water mains or power lines down or whatever that is, and then 0% for about 30 years if you're an individual with a house or a winery or whatever it is. And generally speaking, other kinds of federal emergency help that can also be done instead of by FEMA or the Small Business Administration. You do it through the Fed at 0%, because the Fed can give you 0%. How in God's name could they give us anything more than 0%, since they are there because we allow them to exist, right? We're the American people.
Who are they to charge us interest for our own right to print money?
And instead, you notice this is a recovery based on federal lending, not federal spending. Why should the Federal Reserve, the U.S. government in effect, right, although not enough these days, but most people think of as a government agency, how can it be allowed to pay usurious interest rates to a bankrupt entity like Goldman Sachs? In other words, the whole collection of Wall Street zombie banks only exist because the U.S. federal government has decided to keep them in existence. And the thanks you get is they turn around and charge you, 2, 3, 4, 5% interest or whatever it is, right? Interest that you shouldn't be paying.
While giving you 0.5% interest on your savings, and Americans don't save enough.
Giving you nothing. I think we're going to be at negative rates. Actually, at the new bank that's going to be operating in Walmart, we'll have negative interest rates. Negative.
That sounds about right.
For charging.
Webster, we have negative time now. It's the end of the show.
Okay.
So
Let me just say, for people who are in the 5th Congressional District of California, take a look at James Hinton against Mike Thompson. Very good candidate in Nebraska. That's Dan Burdorf. You got to write him in.